On Monday morning, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social in all capital letters that the United States and Iran had held very good and productive conversations over the previous 2 days, and that based on the tenor and tone of those discussions, he was ordering the Pentagon to postpone all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for 5 days. Within hours, Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf posted on X that no negotiations have been held with the U.S., calling Trump's claim, in his words, fake news used to manipulate the financial and oil markets. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Bagaei backed him up, issuing a formal denial through the state-run IRNA news agency. 2 named officials, 2 directly contradictory statements, made on the same day. At least one of them is not telling the full truth. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis right now and turn on notifications. This story is moving in real time, and the gap between what is being said publicly and what is actually happening in the back channels of this war is exactly the kind of divergence this channel exists to examine. To understand what happened on Monday, you have to understand what Trump threatened on Saturday. Facing a de facto Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that had pushed Brent crude to $114 a barrel, Trump issued Iran a 48-hour ultimatum: reopen the strait or face, in his words, obliteration of its power grid. Iran's response was immediate. Tehran threatened to strike energy facilities across Israel and the Gulf states and warned it would lay sea mines across the entire Persian Gulf if Trump followed through. Markets shuddered. The International Energy Agency's executive director, Fatih Birol, warned publicly that the situation was, quote, very severe and worse than the 2 energy crises of the 1970s and the fallout of the Ukraine war combined. Then, before the 48-hour window expired, Trump announced peace talks and a 5-day pause. Oil dropped more than 7% in a single session, falling from $114 to below $99 a barrel. U.S. stock futures surged. The threat that had been delivered in block capitals on Saturday was gone by Monday morning, also in block capitals, replaced by the language of diplomacy. Look at the timeline. Trump threatened obliteration on Saturday. Iran threatened to mine the Persian Gulf by Sunday. By Monday morning, Trump was citing productive conversations and postponing strikes. The entire sequence took less than 72 hours. That is not the pace of a negotiation. That is the pace of a market intervention. Here is what the verified reporting actually shows about what happened in those 72 hours, and it is more complicated than either side's public statement suggests. An Israeli official told Axios that U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had been in contact with Ghalibaf, the same Iranian parliament speaker who publicly denied any negotiations had taken place. A source with direct knowledge of the discussions told Axios separately that there did not appear to have been any direct talks yet between Ghalibaf and Trump's team. Note the precision of that language. No direct talks yet. The word yet is doing significant analytical work in that sentence. Then came the most important disclosure of the entire day. A senior Iranian foreign ministry official told CBS News exclusively that, and this is a direct quote from their report, "We receive points from the U.S. through mediators, and they are being reviewed. Not talks, not negotiations, points through mediators." Look at the gap between those 2 things. Trump called it productive conversations. Iran called it zero negotiations. What the evidence actually shows is something in between. Messages transmitted through third-party intermediaries, received and under review. Turkey has previously served as one such intermediary. Pakistan's Foreign Office told CNN on Monday that Islamabad was already ready to host talks. Oman has historically been the primary channel. None of these are direct negotiations, but none of them are nothing. This is not a story about whether talks are happening. That question has a more precise answer than either side wants to give publicly. This is a story about what both sides need the world to believe is happening and why those 2 needs are currently incompatible. Trump needed Monday's announcement to do 3 specific things. First, it needed to prevent him from following through on a threat whose consequences of fully mined Persian Gulf, Iranian strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure, $150 oil his own economic advisors had told him were catastrophic. Second, it needed to move energy markets immediately, which it did. Third, it needed to give him a narrative path out of a war he promised during his campaign he would never start. Iran needed Monday's denial to do the opposite. Confirming that talks were underway would signal to its domestic audience and to its regional proxies that the bombardment of 25 days had forced a concession. Ghalibaf's framing was precise. Trump retreated out of fear of Iran's response. That framing keeps the Islamic Republic's position internally coherent. They did not negotiate. They held firm. And the Americans backed down. Both framings can coexist only as long as no one produces documented evidence of direct contact, which is precisely why Trump told reporters he was deliberately not naming the Iranian official he claimed to be speaking with. "I don't want to get him killed," Trump said at a press conference Monday. Whatever the diplomatic reality, the financial markets delivered their verdict immediately, and it was unambiguous. Brent crude's 7% single-session drop following Trump's announcement represented the largest one-day price movement in oil since the early days of the conflict, according to market data reported by CNN. If you own a vehicle, heat a home, or purchase goods that are shipped, which is to say, if you are a functioning participant in any modern economy, that swing is already relevant to your cost of living. The IEA's warning deserves to be stated directly. The head of the International Energy Agency said, "This conflict has already created an energy disruption worse than the 1970s oil shocks and worse than the economic consequences of the Ukraine war." Those two reference points together account for some of the most severe inflation events in the last 50 years of Western economic history. The 5-day pause Trump announced moved markets meaningfully. But the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. The 21 confirmed attacks on commercial vessels since March 1, documented by the UK Maritime Trade Operations Agency, have not stopped. The pause is in the language, "not yet in the waterway." The most analytically significant detail in Monday's reporting was not Trump's Truth Social post. It was the CBS News disclosure buried in paragraph 7 of their live coverage. A senior Iranian foreign ministry official, speaking exclusively to CBS, confirmed that messages from the U.S. had been received through mediators and were being reviewed. That official was not named. But the statement itself contradicts the formal position of the Iranian Foreign Ministry issued hours earlier through IRNA. That is not a minor inconsistency. That is two different Iranian officials delivering two different versions of reality to two different audiences on the same day. Ghalibaf's public denial was aimed at the domestic Iranian audience and at Iran's regional allies. The unnamed official's disclosure to CBS was aimed at Washington via an American news network, signaling that the door is not in fact closed. The silence reversal is visible here, too. Iran fired a new missile barrage at Israel on Tuesday morning. Gulf states reported fresh drone and missile interceptions overnight. If Iran were genuinely engaged in productive talks aimed at ending hostilities, that operational tempo does not reflect it. But if Iran were trying to negotiate from a position of demonstrated strength rather than perceived weakness, the continued strikes make precise strategic sense. You do not pause the pressure before the terms are agreed. You pause it after. Subscribe to Pivot Analysis and turn on notifications. This channel reads the primary sources, examines the operational data, and connects the elements that official communications are keeping separate. When the next development in this story breaks, and based on what the current indicators show, it will break within the 5-day window. Trump just opened. The analysis will be here before the mainstream framing has settled. To be fair, there is a competing interpretation of Monday's events, and it deserves direct engagement. The competing view holds that Trump's announcement was strategically rational and not primarily dishonest. On this reading, Trump had painted himself into a corner with the 48-hour ultimatum. Following through would have triggered Iranian strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure and a potential full closure of the Strait of Hormuz, outcomes whose economic consequences his own administration could not absorb politically. The announcement of talks, whether or not they meet the technical definition of negotiations, gave him a face-saving exit from that corner while simultaneously moving oil markets in a direction beneficial to the U.S. economy. The argument continues that the framing of talks versus messages through mediators is a distinction that matters to diplomats and journalists, but not to the underlying strategic reality, which is that both sides have signaled a willingness to consider terms. This interpretation is not without logic, but it runs into one specific piece of evidence that complicates it considerably. Even as Trump was citing productive conversations, the IDF confirmed it completed a new wave of extensive strikes targeting production sites in Isfahan on Tuesday morning. If the U.S. was genuinely in a 5-day diplomatic pause, its primary military partner in this conflict did not receive that message or chose not to act on it. 3 indicators will tell us within the 5-day window whether Monday's announcement was the beginning of a genuine off-ramp or a market intervention dressed in diplomatic language. Watch the Strait of Hormuz. If the de facto blockade eases meaningfully, if commercial vessel traffic resumes, and the UK maritime trade operations threat level drops from critical, that is evidence of real backchannels producing real movement. If the strait remains functionally closed at the end of the 5 days, the pause was theater. Watch Iran's Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf. He is, according to reporting by Axios, the Iranian official Trump's envoys have been attempting to reach. If Ghalibaf's public statements shift from flat denial toward the language of conditional engagement, something like, "We have received proposals which we are examining," that is the tell that contact is real. His current language of zero negotiations is the starting position of a party that has not yet agreed to be seen at the table. Watch Trump's deadline behavior. He set a 8-hour ultimatum on Saturday and abandoned it inside the window. He has now set a 5-day pause. If that pause extends beyond 5 days without announced framework, the pattern will be clear. Trump is using deadlines not as operational triggers, but as pressure instruments that he is willing to reset when the market consequences of following through become politically intolerable. The 5-day clock started Monday. It expires on Saturday. Whether it ends with a framework, an extension, or a resumption of strikes on Iranian power infrastructure will tell us more about the actual state of this war than anything either side said on Monday. The answer to the question this video is named after is more unsatisfying than a clean yes or no. Trump is not lying about the existence of contact. Iran is not lying about the absence of formal, direct negotiations. Both sides are describing the same set of intermediary messages through the framing that serves their domestic political needs. The real question, the one neither side has answered, is whether those messages contain anything that both parties can actually agree to. And that answer is coming.